story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Vipin. It's great to be with you to discuss today a very, very important subject, which is evidenced, by the way, from the internet's search engine optimization. Every time I get our Google Analytics, I'm amazed at how this subject is so prominent. And it is how to create space between stimulus and response, inspired by your written reflection by that title. And I actually did a little experiment myself a couple of days ago. And I found that when I searched for the space between stimulus and response, your reflection came up as the second hit. That was amazing. It's clear that this is an important subject once again, and I'm really eager to get into it with you.
Thank you. Well, I think that it probably came up as the second hit for you because you've been on that page before. So that's more about personal identification and search than anything else.
That may be. I was wondering. That clarifies. In any case, yeah, this is something that I've been looking forward to. And I wanted to start by asking, so what inspired you in the first place to write this piece, How to Create Space Between Stimulus and Response?
Yeah, I had a coaching session that was highly impactful, and it was just about this exact topic. So I had a coaching session just a few weeks prior. That was really the premise for what I had written about, but it had such an effect on me, I wanted to share it with everyone else.
And tell us, what is the quote behind the title?
Yeah, so this is from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And for those who may be unfamiliar, Viktor Frankl was a prisoner at Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And he has written this book, Man's Search for Meaning, incredibly filled with wisdom based on his experiences there. And one of the things that he said, this particular quote was, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that quote, the first time I read it, I just felt like I couldn't even understand the amount of wisdom that was packed in, wisdom and personal realization that was packed into those few sentences. But I felt like this was a key to my life and to many people's lives.
Absolutely. I had a very similar reaction when I first discovered this as a monk, and it became very quickly something that I would reference frequently and which became a guidepost. And we'll also see, you mentioned in your piece a little bit about my guru, my teacher. And so, yeah, it's something that is central, I think, for anybody that wants to grow personally. Tell a little bit more about what it means to you.
Yeah. Well, also, I just think when I first came across it, it was a definition of freedom that I hadn't heard before. And so also the association with freedom. And people talk about freedom and the importance of freedom. And then I'd never thought of it in these terms. That was really striking. And I think, like you mentioned, it was a line that left such a deep impression. I also shared it with lots of other people. And I thought about this often, stimulus and response, stimulus and response. The freedom was elusive. The freedom that he talks about, the space in between, the power to choose our response in between stimulus and response, I couldn't quite find it it felt like it was, again, and it was a really important idea, and it remained an idea for a long, long time. But I would still feel compelled to share it with other people and share it in coaching sessions as well. And then this coaching session I had with my coach on something I was working through really helped expand my understanding of what that space is in between.
Yeah. So I wanted you to bring us into that coaching session. That's a great segue. What happened in that coaching session? Bring us in.
Yeah. So I was speaking with my coach about just wanting to be less reactive with our kids when they were behaving in ways that were triggering me. And I had referenced this quote. That, I just can't seem to find any space between stimulus and response. And my coach, Mary, had said, well, between stimulus and response are a set of beliefs. And it just stopped me in my tracks. I'm like, wait a second, there's more to this that I hadn't quite understood before. And so she said, yeah, there are a set of beliefs about the situation, about the other person, and about yourself. And we hadn't gone very far yet in this process, but I immediately felt like there was some eureka in what she had shared.
What was that eureka? What did it do for you?
Well, it was always stimulus and response, and there's a space in between. With this, I never had the space felt so compressed. And I thought, well, if I keep working on myself, then I will be able to create more space between stimulus and response. And the question that she had posed, what were my beliefs? It all of a sudden allowed me to make a little bit more sense of the space. And I went with it and I said, okay, let me understand what were my beliefs at the point of stimulus. And the response is built on those beliefs. But I'd never identified beliefs in between stimulus and response before. It was like, oh, my response is based on the stimulus versus my response is based on the set of beliefs I have about the stimulus.
I understand. Yeah, that's great.
That was really mind-blowing, actually, because now all of a sudden I have more of a part to play in this trajectory. It's not just, something happened, stimulus happened, external event, and I responded. So it's the stimulus that caused me to respond. No, it's actually the set of beliefs that caused me to respond. And that is so empowering.
Yes.
All of a sudden versus being disempowering.
Yeah, because you're no longer purely a victim of circumstance.
Exactly.
Suddenly you have new agency. Wait a minute, I have beliefs. I can shift those beliefs. That changes my reaction to the stimulus. Wow, I have power here. I have freedom here.
Yeah. I'm getting excited just talking about this again. And as you're saying that, I'm like, all of a sudden, I feel more empowered even in this conversation.
I know exactly how you feel. I'm with you. So give us an example of how does that play out? You also referenced in your piece the example of you with your son. Would you want to go into that one?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, this was a while ago. So my memory, the poignancy of that event has faded a little bit, but it's still quite present for me. So this was a situation, it was just an everyday, usual evening routine. We're getting the kids ready for bedtime. And I was in the bathroom with our daughter, Asha, as she was brushing her teeth. And I don't even remember what we were giggling and laughing about. She was being silly and funny, and we were both laughing a lot. And her twin brother, Dhruv, was outside. And somehow something had happened where he thought he may have heard something, or he just assumed that Asha was making fun of him. And the laughter was at his expense. And it literally had nothing to do with him at all. But he was outside and I could hear him, just making noises that suggested some upsettedness. So I went outside and just checked in with him. And he told me that, he was upset. He felt like Asha was making fun of him. And I tried to reassure him, but I didn't spend that much time. I just said, oh, no, that's not what's happening. And I went back in also because I was enjoying the playfulness in that moment. And so I went back to it, didn't give our son enough attention. And he stormed into the room, his bedroom, their shared bedroom, slammed the door. And he ended up taking something that she had made and throws it against the door. It breaks. And I hear that from the bathroom. And I immediately go from a state of joyful and relaxed to rage. I'm just like, how could he do this? And I go into the room. I grab him tightly by the arm and I start reprimanding him.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what were the beliefs in that?
Yeah. So what happened was when I was in this coaching session, Mary had asked me, let's rewind the tape and let's replay it just as I kind of did with you right now. And we paused the tape right at this moment where I walked into the room and she asked me that question, what were my beliefs? I started thinking about what were my beliefs in that moment. And what I had identified was that I believed that my son Dhruv should have known that Asha and I were not making fun of him. He should have known that we wouldn't do that in general. And he should have known that we weren't doing that in the moment. I believe that even if he did think we were making fun of him, it's not appropriate for him to destroy her things as a consequence. I believe that it wasn't appropriate for him to express his anger by throwing things. And I believe that as a 6-year-old, not as a 6-year-old, but I just believe that he should have known better about the whole situation. So those were my beliefs about him and the situation. And then Mary had asked me, well, first of all, as I even just started to think about those beliefs, I remember being in that coaching session and a smile coming over my face, thinking like, oh, so interesting that these are the beliefs upon which my anger was stimulated, that my angry response. Because even as I started thinking about those beliefs, I recognized that I don't actually believe some of these things. I mean, I'm saying that, even especially the last one, my son should know better. And I think like, I, as a 40-something-year-old man, often do not know better in situations where I'm triggered by something that I believe is going on. So what am I expecting of a 6-year-old who's still developing all of his ability to self-regulate? And then we turn to my beliefs about myself in that moment. And there also, the beliefs that I had identified were that my son Dhruv's response was a reflection of my parenting. So him getting angry and throwing something is an indication that I am not controlling the chaos in our home and I am failing as a parent. And we know where that set of beliefs can take us. And quickly, the inner critic starts really pounding me. And just, so helpful to identify all of these beliefs that were operating. And there were probably many more, but those were some of the initial ones that I'd identified. And what we did from there is Mary asked me to, let's take any of these beliefs that you want to swap out, that you don't actually believe, as we've now slowed down everything and you think about, and swap in other beliefs that you actually hold to be true.
How can you have beliefs that you don't believe in?
Yeah. That is such a good question. That is such a good question. You've actually stopped me in my tracks there. How can we have beliefs that we don't actually believe in? I think one of the things that starts to happen is, I think one is sometimes in our way of operating quickly, we project certain things onto other people. And we might project things that are in ourselves onto others. So, for example, some of the ways that I see our children, even though they're young and growing and developing, is I know I do this. I see them as just small versions of myself. And on one hand, I think that I don't treat them as young kids. I give them the benefit of the doubt, but also then don't take into account that they are learning and growing and developing, and they're at such an early stage of their lives. So sometimes I think there can be a blind spot there. Another thing that I think happens, I was thinking about this when I was a founder in tech. I would always hear VCs talk about pattern recognition, and their pattern recognition is what makes them so good at their jobs. And I think that pattern recognition has its place, and there's some benefits, but there are also some big costs to it. And so here, in these types of situations, I'm also operating on a lot of pattern recognition. But the problem is, like, as human beings, we are always changing and growing and evolving. And when I rely on my pattern recognition, I can easily start to assume more of a fixed mindset around people. And so, something happens and I quickly interpret that as, oh, there he goes again, different day, same behavior. And when the other person experiences that limiting sort of perception of them, that affects also how they show up. So I think that another way to answer your question about how is it possible that we can believe something that we don't actually believe, I think we're not actually taking the time to figure out, what do I believe? We're just responding. And the response is based on beliefs that are not really well thought through.
Great. Yeah. So with more reflection, you can be more present to what you actually believe in at a deeper level, as opposed to operating off of shallower sets of beliefs that come when we're stressed or, pressed to react in a certain way. Is that fair to say?
That is fair. Another thing that's coming to me is thinking about the beliefs of the ego versus the beliefs of the self.
You beat me to the punch. So that's what I had in mind as soon as I asked that question. This is great.
Yeah.
Yes.
It took me a while to get there because I hadn't thought about this question.
Yeah.
And it's such a deep and meaningful one. But I was thinking about, in a totally different situation, how I can respond in the same way. So think about an office setting. I'm in a conference room and I'm presenting some idea, and immediately someone says something in counter to that. And I may not even be able to hear the thing, but I immediately defend my position. So what is my belief in that? There are a lot of beliefs in that moment, but a lot of those beliefs are coming from my ego's need to prove myself and defend myself. And if I were to be able to slow down and operate from a higher consciousness, from a place of the self, then all of a sudden the beliefs are quite different. And how I might respond would be quite different.
Beautiful. So there are actually two levels of beliefs and a whole spectrum in between, where we have mixed beliefs because we have the influence of the ego and we're trying to live as the self to some degree, perhaps. So it creates this bizarre wide spectrum. And just getting in touch with ourselves and our deepest beliefs and cultivating them. I mean, we also have to do a lot of work to get there. That's a lifelong journey in and of itself, to operate from the place of the self. But that's really an opportunity to shave off some of these shallower, more superficial beliefs of the ego that are getting us into trouble all the time at work, at home, in every aspect of our lives. That's what I'm seeing through this conversation. And it's so helpful just to underscore that reality, that dynamic, and the potential if we are more in touch with who we really are, what happens to our beliefs, what happens to our reactivity, and the space between stimulus and response expanding.
Yeah, I feel like I may need to write a prologue to this, an addendum to this reflection, because it's really just helpful thinking about beliefs that are coming from two different vantage points.
I love that. I think that's a follow-up special request sequel. And hopefully the interest that has sparked, so many hits to our website from just this exploration of stimulus and response and the space between them would warrant that follow-up. I'm inspired. So I wanted to say, you had also drawn out a sort of process for what we can do based on, as I mentioned earlier, what my guru had taught, called the emotional traffic light. So how does that play into this? The emotional traffic light? What is that? What do we do with that?
Yeah, thank you. So your guru, Satchidanand Swami, had given a talk at Upbuild. And this was just, again, in the same time, this is where you see convergence and synchronicity. And I felt like this message was really loud for me over these few weeks. And so he'd given this great talk about his whole sort of his experience as a monk. He's been a monk for 40 years. And at the end of his talk, he offered us one tool that has helped him tremendously on his journey. And I thought, one tool from all of these years of being a monk, this is really important. And that tool was, as you mentioned, the emotional traffic light. And I think it dovetails very nicely with what we've been talking about with stimulus and response. So what he said, this is the emotional traffic light. So the first step is, when something overwhelming or upsetting happens, you stop. That's the red light. You immediately stop. The second step is you watch what's happening from a distance and you try to prepare a mature response as opposed to just reacting. So the question arises, what could be a better way to deal with this? And in the framework of stimulus, beliefs, and response, as we've been talking about, this is where you would think about your beliefs as you kind of step back. What are my beliefs right now? What beliefs do I actually believe? Does the self believe? And what would be a mature response? So this is the yellow. This is the slowing down what's happening. And then the third step is to apply the insights that you had as you slow down, keeping in mind what is beneficial for all of the people involved and in this particular situation. And then you're free to proceed. And that's when you get the green light to go forward. So red, yellow, green as the emotional traffic light, I thought was, very much a parallel with this whole exploration around stimulus and response.
Wonderful. So red light means, how do I know I'm getting a red light? I'm having a reaction. There's some trigger that's making me want to respond to the stimulus. So red light, stop. Yellow light is now use that pause to get in touch with, what would my real self or what would my best self want to do here? If I were at my best, how would I really want to deal with this? And then the green light is actually doing it, trying to mold yourself in that moment to what it is that would be optimal, coming from a deeper part of you.
Yeah, being intentional. Once you have that clarity, then going with intentionality versus reactivity.
And I also remember at the first special at Remembering Who We Are that he did, he was sharing that it took him some time to really get this down. So if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, well, that sounds really great, but man, it's a wobbly effort, or I have some skepticism around it even before I try, you're not alone. I think that is very, very normal. And even Satchidanand Swami was saying, like, this takes some practice. Practice makes perfect. So let us not be discouraged, and let us also really make it a practice, because that's the only way that we have any hope to gain that freedom. If we practice it, then there's a chance. If we don't practice it, well, then it's back to the victim mode.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if Viktor Frankl called this freedom, freedom does not come easy or cheaply. So the emotional traffic light framework gives you sort of some simple steps, but that does not, that it's not make it easy. And, this is life's work, actually. It's life's work. And like you said, it takes practice and practice and practice. And I had shared this reflection more than a year ago now, probably a year and a half ago. And I fail at this every day. It's like, I remember writing, I want the whole community to hold me accountable to this. And I get some glimpses of progress, but they are also, covered by a lot of realizations that of the lack of progress. And I mean, I can think of an example from yesterday itself, where similar situation, this time with my daughter. And I was thinking about that just this morning before we were going to talk, that there was an experience I had with her. And one of the beliefs that I had was, there she goes again, doing something to let me know of her displeasure of my request of her. And so I'm reacting to that. She's trying to goad me into something. And I mean, what good can come from that type of belief? So it's a lot of practice and work. And yet I don't think there's another choice. I don't feel discouraged by the times where I haven't been able to use the traffic light.
Wonderful. I mean, I'm in the same boat. I was going to say the same thing myself. It's such a work in progress, but as you said, there's no choice. Like, it's this or, leave myself to being a victim of circumstance and my own reactivity and ego. So it's kind of obvious. It's just, we have to have that grit and that hunger to really want to be our best, to go through the pains of going against the current. And, our usual conditioning is so strong that it's easier to just kind of be like, well, anyway, and then normalize and justify. Anybody would react this way. I'm right. So for me, I'm facing that all the time, but it's not, I don't want to be in that conditioning mode. I want to make sure that I keep walking one step at a time, patiently, wisely, so that one day I will be out of this and I will have that freedom. So what is on the other side? What is the situation with Asha or Dhruv look like when you're on the other side?
When I am on the other side?
Yeah, if you have now operated off of the beliefs of your real self and you've taken the emotional traffic light to heart, you've done that homework, what happens?
I think I'm seeing them more wholly, more fully. And what is the experience of a person, a child, who is seen more completely? That's everything. I think one of the things that I shared, if one of my beliefs is this person, there he or she goes again, the response on the other side is, oh, there my dad goes again, seeing me in this way. So how limiting is that? And it doesn't account for the reality, actually. It doesn't account for the change and the growth and the evolution that's happening moment to moment, day to day. And then, frankly, I think we play into that. Even as an adult, if someone sees me a certain way that feels limiting, I end up playing to that. I end up either dismissing this person or just you kind of live up to your expectations. And when those expectations are low, then that's what I'm living up to. And when you put it in those terms, when I put it in those terms, it feels quite stark. Like I would never want that for anyone.
I love that your vision expands and people can be seen by you more completely because they're not subject to your narrow vision and even objects within your narrow vision. You're really seeing them as proper subjects. And that's powerful. I was also thinking how that expansiveness is contagious. Then other people start passing that on, as opposed to them being stunted in some way because of our limited vision and they're not being encouraged to evolve out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple other things I was thinking about as we were talking the last few minutes. What does it take to be able to do this? I think that we talked about practice is a big part of it. I think it starts with the desire. It starts with a real desire to want that freedom that Viktor Frankl describes and that Satchidananda Swami talked about. So, because that propels the work and the practice, because there will be a lot of failure along the way. So I think it starts with that desire. And then it takes a lot of humility, because in the moment you identify your beliefs, the humility to accept that these beliefs that I have, I need to question, right? Typically, the way that we respond is, oh, okay, something is happening. I have beliefs about that. I know I am right. And here's my response. And so it takes a lot of humility to question our immediate natural reactions to things, especially because we're conditioned to be like, hey, trust your gut, your intuition is strong, but these aren't things that are coming from your gut and intuition. That's the challenge. And then the other thing I was going to say, when I think about the emotional traffic light, think about a traffic light. I think about if you're driving fast always, you typically will just not stop at yellow lights. You just kind of always make it through the intersection, right? And so I think the other thing that's required is it's not just a desire to slow down, but actually a practice, an intention of slowing down, because that's the only way you can even bring the traffic light to bear. Otherwise, you can think of like we're always in such a rush. If we're always in a rush to get somewhere, we're always running late, we have a million things to do. We're just trying to get through the intersection. We're not trying to be very conscious of it. I think that whole metaphor of the traffic light is so apt here, because if we are always in a rush, then there's no place for the red and the yellow light. It is always go, go, go. And that is something that is required. And I think that's frankly something that I need to do more of. I struggle with a lot. And that's maybe part of why progress has been slow or slower than I would like on this front.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, we need patience. And the thing is, even you mentioned this in your piece, this is not a replacement for disciplining, or certainly for children, or even with adults. Like strong action sometimes is required. But where you're coming from and how that is dealt with is so different if we take the time to actually invest in who we really are deeper and then act on that basis. It just changes everything, even in the most difficult, uncomfortable, unpleasant circumstances. So I hope that this gives everyone some hope and some inspiration, some really strong impetus to start the practice of the emotional traffic light and creating that space between stimulus and response. So wonderful speaking with you, Vipin. Is there anything that you would want to share at the close?
No, thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. I feel like you actually furthered my understanding of the beliefs through this conversation, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Means a lot. I'm inspired by your writing and your words. So thank you. Okay, awesome. All the best. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.